Greetings, everyone. Jim Walker here. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back to all returning viewers. Uh, if you take a look at the list of videos here on my page, channel, whatever the term is, I can never keep up with that. You'll see that I'm not the most prolific presenter of content on YouTube. There are guys who are cranking stuff out 3, 4, 5, or even more times per week. That's just not something I've done to date. But I do have my list of things I want to do. I've got my legal pad with my ideas scribbled out on it. And if something catches my attention, one thing I will do is take a look around YouTube, see if it has been presented already, see if it's been addressed already. And specifically, see if someone's going to say what I already said what I'm going to say. Not that I won't post at that point because I might have a different take or present it differently. But if something has been covered to death, I'm more likely to try to find something else to talk about, try to find an empty space to fill. The example I always give is snare drum tuning. There are so many scores of videos on snare drum tuning. I'd like to think I know how to tune a snare drum, but it's already been covered, so I'm going to move on to other things. And this is the case with this video to discuss today. I was thinking about things to do, and I thought I hadn't done too many orchestral things, and I thought, well, a couple of years ago I got to play Ravel's Bolero. I got to play the snare drum part in an orchestra concert. So let me talk about that. And I figured there's got to be dozens of videos talking about how to play this. It's a very well-known piece. It's a popular excerpt. It's on all the audition lists. So people must have talked about it, right? Well, not so much. When I searched, I found performances by orchestras, of course. I found a surprising number of cover videos, drummers playing the part along to existing recordings. And I also found a number of promotional videos, as in we have our Saskatchewan Philharmonia concert this coming Sunday at 3 o'clock, and here's our principal snare drum player to talk about the first piece on the program, Ravel's Bolero, and the principal percussionist talks about snare drums and Bolero, and they're promoting the event. But not a whole lot in terms of tutorials, not a lot in terms of content talking about playing the actual piece. And that surprised me at first, but then after I thought about it for a moment, not so much. Because I thought back to the moment that I found out that we'd be playing this in this particular orchestra I work with. The conductor and I used to teach at the same school, and one morning early on in the fall semester we passed each other in the hall, and he said, hey, I want to let you know that we've got the programs set for our upcoming season, and in the spring we're doing Bolero. And I said, that's great, I'm looking forward to it. He says, I knew you'd be happy to hear it. I also wanted to let you know because I know you'll want to practice. And of course I said, thanks for the heads up, I'll get right on it. As I'm walking away though, to be honest, I was thinking practice this. I'm supposed to practice this. I've known this excerpt since I was in high school. Everyone, grab your sticks, play along. We all know it. I don't have any music in front of me. We know it. Bolero, excerpt. Practice? Really? Well, it turns out Maestro knew what he was talking about, because as I got into the piece, I realized there were things that weren't presented when I saw that little two-measure excerpt in, say, the Goldenberg book, or in one of the myriad photocopies that I had gathered and exchanged with friends over the years, collecting our orchestral excerpts to practice. And that's kind of the point of this video, specifically dealing with the snare drum part on Ravel's Bolero, but I think this applies to many excerpts as well. Just because you know the excerpt, and fine, prepare them for auditions if you're getting ready for, if you're working professionally and you're auditioning for a position, or you're in college or university and you're auditioning for ensemble placement, or you got a jury, or you are getting ready to audition for graduate school. Yes, by all means, study and learn the excerpt. But just don't think that because you know the excerpt that you are now prepared to play the entire piece. So we're going to discuss a few aspects of Bolero that don't present in the basic two-measure excerpt. And what I just played, that's it. Usually the excerpts I've seen are taken from the first two measures of the snare drum part. Just that basic rhythm marked pianissimo. Why not? Let's play it again. And I understand exactly why that's asked on so many auditions. It shows that you can play quietly, with control and consistency. And that's great. But let's move on to things that you don't realize if that's your sum total of your knowledge of Ravel's Bolero. Uh, let's start with dynamics first, just in terms of picking out the instruments we're going to play. You look at the excerpt, you see pianissimo, and it's a natural thing to say, let me find a drum and sticks which may facilitate playing softly, which is lovely. If I'm playing Lieutenant Kiji, that opening sequence on the snare drum, usually I'm going to go with a shallow snare drum. Maybe even pick out certain sticks to help me play at my best at a softer dynamic level. But keep in mind with Bolero, it's not a two-measure part. The music goes on for about 14 minutes, 13 to 14 minutes, depending upon what kind of mood Maestro is in that day and how much coffee he's had. 5 pages. The snare drum part, at least the edition that we used, 5 pages long. And by the end, quoting the philosopher Jack White, it might get loud. Actually, it will get loud. But on the 5th page, you get to fortissimo. And in fact, something I didn't realize until I saw the music, which doesn't speak well of my knowledge of the piece in general because it's fairly well known. If you have enough hands on deck in the percussion section, towards the end, a second percussionist will begin doubling the snare drum part. In fact, a friend of mine said he saw the Boston Symphony a number of years ago play with 3 snare drummers going by the end of the piece. So if you want to pick out a drum, sticks that'll afford playing softly, by all means, do so. Just make sure that you can cover the loud dynamics comfortably at the end. This is the drum I ended up using on the concert. And just as a disclaimer, I played the one concert, series of rehearsals leading up to it, and we had a couple of children's concerts the following Monday morning for the local school system. So that's the sum total of my experience playing this snare drum part with an orchestra. So if you've played this 5, 6, 7 times and want to share your comments and you've come to some different conclusions than I have reached, of course, I welcome your input. The comment section will be open. But I ended up, at the first rehearsal, brought a couple of different snare drums. So I wanted to find the right drum for that piece in that hall, in that orchestra on the day. And started with a 5-inch deep snare drum. Asked some of the other guys in the section to go out and take a listen, see what it sounded like out in the hall. They said the 5 sounded good. I went to a 7-inch deep snare drum, both of these 14-inch in diameter. And they said that was better. And I ended up going with this one, which I'm going to talk about in a separate video because I suspect there will be some curiosity about it. This is one of my many home-built, do-it-yourself snare drums. This is the drum I built, my knockoff, my imitation, my best take on a Fred Hinger Space Tone snare drum. 2 separate sections that can be opened up or closed up to varying degrees. And right now I've got it open roughly 1/8 of an inch between the top shell section and the bottom shell section. All I know is I don't understand the acoustics behind it. All I know is if I do that, the snare response gets better. I wish I had more scientific information for you on that. I'm sure some engineer out there somewhere will be able to chime in why that works, but I've noticed if I open it up a little bit, it sounds better. So this is the exact drum I ended up using. I've thought about using a shallower snare drum, but in my experience, your mileage may vary, as they say. When played really loud, a shallow snare drum can get a little strident, and I didn't want that. I wanted something full sounding. And I have the ability to play soft on this drum, so I have both areas covered. My choice. Sticks, the same thing. There is one drumstick manufacturer in particular. We all know who they are. I have no affiliation. I'm not going to give them free advertising. They know, you know who they are. We all know who they are. Who has one stick in their catalog named after this piece. It's called the Bolero. And it would be a very natural thing to say, well, I'm playing Ravel's Bolero. There's a stick called the Bolero. Let me get the stick so I can play Bolero. And they're fine sticks. I've got a pair. I've used them for years. But what I ended up doing, my favorite drumsticks. I've had these for 40 years now. Set of Bill Reamer, Michael Bookspan model sticks. Picked these up in 82 or 83. And a teacher of mine had a set. I tried them, just fell in love with them. The balance, the feel is just perfect for me. And I don't know if the fact that I'm so comfortable playing at a variety of dynamic levels, I use them for everything. I don't know how much of that is the design and manufacture of the stick versus the fact that I've been playing them for 40 years and I've gotten comfortable with them. But either way, just my regular drumstick, regular snare drum, that's what worked for me. As they say, your mileage may vary. Continuing on, I mentioned the snare drum part is 5 pages long. This is a practical thing. I saw the music and I thought, how am I going to get all these pages out here? And as I say this, you're probably 3 steps ahead of me already. Let me go through it. I thought, do I want to photocopy, have 5 pages going across on a stand? This is not very elegant. I don't think that's the best solution. Am I going to stop and turn a page? Well, my hands are kind of busy, and I don't think I'm going to go from switch to one hand playing while I turn the page with the other. Too much of a risk of the rhythm getting a little shaky or inconsistent, I should say. And the same thing with the sound. So that choice was out the window. Briefly, and almost just for humorous effect, I thought about having a page turner. Ask one of the other guys in the section to come over and turn the pages for me. And of the guys in the section, I'll bet that all of them would have gotten a real kick out of being a page turner on this piece. But it seemed kind of silly. So that option went out the window. Tried photocopying and reducing the size to squeeze it down to 2 or 3 pages. And by the time I got it to a usable size, it was too small to read anything. And it was about this point I arrived at the point that you're probably at already, which is, why do I need to see all these pages? It's the same rhythm over and over again. I've played it a few times now. I don't have the music in front of me. It's not that difficult of a rhythm to memorize. So you don't need to see every single note that you play all the way through. It doesn't change until the end, the last measure, as you lead into it. And should be significantly louder, but that's the one spot where it changes. So rather than having 4 pages of the same thing that I don't really need, what do I need in those sections? Even specifically for rehearsals, but even in performance. I need to know what the dynamic levels are. I need to know, because it does increasingly get louder and louder as the piece continues. And I also need to know, just for my own reference, what instrument has the melody, because really the whole piece is a repeat of the same 16-bar phrase. There's a little 2-bar tag leading into each time. There's some slight changes in the orchestration and the setting, but basically it's the same melody over and over and over again. It's just treated differently. So what I ended up doing is making a lead sheet, a roadmap, like you might do on drum set if you're called for a gig and you're playing a song that you don't know that well. You just write out a roadmap for it. And I did the very same thing, because it was the same phrase. So I wrote, the first time is in the flute. Second time, I think, is in the bassoon. I should have written this down. But just marking through what the instruments are, mark the rehearsal numbers. So if Maestro says, let's begin at rehearsal 9, I knew exactly where we were. And at a certain point, I transitioned from this handwritten roadmap to the 5th page, the final page of the printed part, just to follow along. And if you're asking, Jim, are you going to post a PDF of this roadmap? No, I'm not. One, because it was 5 years ago. I don't know where it is anymore. Secondly, it's so easy to do. You don't need me to do it. And third, going through and doing it yourself, it just reinforces the information about what instrument is playing what. It's good to put this together on your own. Not difficult to do if you want to go that route. You could even avoid that if you want. That's great to have the rehearsal numbers. Rehearsal markings for rehearsal, even playing the piece. But in terms of making sure you catch that ending, that rhythm I played before, that you don't want to miss. It would be a shame to get 14 minutes through and then to trip on the finish line at that point. I think it's 16 measures before the end, last rehearsal marking, is a modulation to E major. You can't miss it. If you have any ear for major versus minor, for key changes, for tonality, for tonal centers, if you have any sort of ear that will pick up on that, you can't miss the key change. So you can just keep along your merry way, playing the whole piece, and then you hear the E major key change, and there we are at this rehearsal marking. Or I think it's 6 measures before the end, section percussion comes in. You've got a couple of cues to work with. I like having the roadmap in front of me. I like knowing where I am. I'm just particular that way. But you don't need to read all 5 pages. Speaking of 5 pages, kind of implied along here is the endurance. That's something else you don't get in a two-measure excerpt, even if you play it 4 or 5 times. A couple of things will come up if you need to play for 14 or so minutes straight. That's about what the piece lasted when we played it. So you may notice that as I am presenting this video, I am seated. I don't know if it's showing on the other side of this narrative, but I'm using the same stool that I would use for a timpani gig. And not really sitting on it like you would sit on a drum set stool, just leaning against it, just to take the weight off of my feet. Now, I play solo vibes gigs where I play for 2-3 hours standing up, and it doesn't faze me. So I can stand up and play, but it just makes things more comfortable. I'm a big fan of making my life easier when I'm playing these gigs. And sitting like this, it's just a little more relaxing, keeps my shoulders relaxed, which will help my consistency of sound, consistency of rhythm, my general tone quality. So it just was the thing that I wanted to do. You don't have to do this. The other thing in terms of the endurance of playing this, it's really mental more than physical. This is not the most physically taxing part to play. The challenge is keeping your place and not turning the two measures around. And some of you may have had no trouble with this. For the most part, I didn't have trouble, but we have two measures of 3/4 in this repeating cycling pattern. And the first 2/3 or so of each measure is exactly the same. You don't have any differentiation. The first 2 beats plus is, and it's that third beat. First measure, you just have the 2/8 notes. And the second measure, you have the sextuplet. And playing the excerpt by yourself, you're not going to flip that around. There's a couple of spots in the melody. The way Ravel wrote it, the phrasing is just a little bit ambiguous. And if you're not on your game and you're not focused, I don't say very easy, but there's a possibility of getting distracted. At least that's what I found to be the case. So to guard against that, 2 solutions. One was suggested by a friend of mine. It's a little more elegant than the one I used, which I'll mention in a moment. And I think if I ever get the chance to play the piece again, I may go with that. His thought was, rather than playing a measure of 3/4 and then a second measure of 3/4, think of it as this phrase as a single measure of 6/4. The audience won't know the difference. It won't sound any different to them, but that way you won't have these 2 components that can be flipped back and forth. So instead of thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, you'll think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very easy to keep your place. What I did wasn't so elegant. I kept it in 3/4 in my mind and as I'm reading, and very subtly, no one would be able to hear it, no one would be able to see it. Inside my shoes, just with my toes, just tapping, marking time. Left foot, right foot. I went back to my high school marching band days. First beat, first step is left foot. You got an even number of feet, odd number of beats in the measure. First measure you start on the left foot, second measure you start on the right foot. And just this little tapping of my toe, just enough for me to feel it. There were 1 or 2 times in rehearsals where it saved me from that momentary thought of, oh geez, which measure am I on? If I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Just that feeling of, okay, I started on the right foot. I'm going to right, left, right. That was just enough of a physical reminder, a little bit of a trigger to help me play this ending or that ending. So those are 2 solutions that I think work fairly well. One worked well for me. I didn't turn it around at all in any of the performances we had, the concert or the children's concerts. The 6/4 idea I think works beautifully. But come up with something. I would suggest having something in there just as a backup, just to be safe. One last thing, and I always say one last thing, and then I think of 3 more things. But at the moment, one last thing that doesn't really present itself in the excerpt. Let me put it this way. At this point in my life, I have no designs on going back to college or university to get a doctoral degree. If I were to do so, I thought about what topics I might use for a thesis or a dissertation. And one thought which occurs to me once in a while, and I don't know if there's enough there for a full doctoral dissertation, but I always thought that the snare drum part in Bolero was the first drum set part for a European style orchestra. Now I'm talking about function and not practical content of it, because there's no hi-hats, there's no bass drums, it's a snare drum, it's a snare drum part. But how you function is a direct parallel with playing drum set in a symphony orchestra. And I know I drew on that as I was playing. I drew on my experience playing drum set with that same orchestra. The fact that you really are the conductor, you really are in charge of the tempo. And unlike so many other situations when you're playing percussion with an orchestra in which you are matching up with other sections, xylophone part in Porgy and Bess, you with the strings. The bell excerpt in Sorcerer's Apprentice, you're with the woodwinds. Another one you might be with a low brass. So you are embellishing those sections. So you're following and fitting in with what they are doing. This is the opposite. The rest of the orchestra has to fit into the ostinato that you're setting up. So you have to lead that way as if you're playing drum set. Quick anecdote, and those of you who have experienced this know where I'm going with this. I work with regional orchestras, so there's no monitors, there's no in-ears, there's nothing like that. We're just dealing with the natural acoustics on the stage as we play. And it always seems to end up that the drum set is over in the percussion section. For us, it's stage right. And the basses are where they usually are, way over on stage left, which gives us like a 40, 50, whatever foot gap between, just enough time for the delay in sound waves to become noticeable. So we're playing the Sinatra medley or whatever we're doing, and I'm playing ride cymbal beat, playing my quarter notes, laying it down as solidly as I can. It takes a second for those notes to get across the stage to our bass player Sue, who is being a conscientious and professional and accomplished musician, is trying to lock in with the drummer's ride cymbal, which she does. She's playing right with what she's hearing, which unfortunately is a split second later than when I played it. So she plays her notes. That sound comes back across the stage. Come to me, another additional delay. So I start to hear she's not with me. She's a little bit behind me. So I'm thinking, am I rushing? Do I want to pull back a little bit? And me being the conscientious professional musician, lock things together, I pull back a little bit. And then my notes go over there, and she pulls back, and the whole thing spirals down from there. Once I realized what was going on in that context, that I couldn't play as though I were playing in a small group, which I would be able to do if she and I were adjacent, 5 feet apart, we would be able to just play as you normally would in a rhythm section. I just decided to take command. Here's the beat, guys. Right here. You're coming with me. Let's hope I'm right, because you're coming with me. I'm not budging. And once I did that and set that and let the rest of the orchestra follow what I was doing, everything improved. So this is the same sort of a thing here. You are really driving the band, just as if you were playing the drum set. Yeah, that's something that you just don't pick up in two-measure orchestral excerpt. It's a functional thing that simply wouldn't present itself. So these are among the things I discovered as I went through and played Ravel's Bolero on the snare drum part. So in hindsight, what Maestro said when he told me, I wanted to let you know, because I know you're going to want to practice, these are the things. As I record this, I expect I'm going to be dropping this right in the middle of the body of the main Bolero snare drum lesson that I recorded for YouTube earlier today. So if the camera positions look different, the levels are a little bit different, so be it. I've just recorded another video and realized I left something out of the Bolero one. I mentioned Maestro. Beginning of the school year, we ran into each other in the hall, and he said, I know you're going to want to practice this. And I thought, why am I going to practice? What do I need to practice? Well, one thing that needs to be practiced, and fortunately I had a head start on this, is just being able to play softly for a sustained period of time under control. It's so easy, and I've fallen into this too, as you're working on your rudiments. On a pad. Just kind of cruise along at mezzo whatever. You're not really thinking loud or soft. You're just working on the rhythm, the speed. You may have practicing with a metronome. You're working on the evenness of the hands, accents, all that stuff. But practicing at dynamic levels is something that's really critical. And this, I think, is one of the things that Maestro was talking about when he said, I know you're going to want to practice. Fortunately, just coincidentally, I was a couple of steps ahead of him. So I recommend, whether you expect to ever play Bolero or not, put some dynamics into your practice. Be able to play both quietly and fortissimo and above. One, be able to do it, and two, be comfortable at it. So when we played, and for basically the first half of the piece before you get above mezzo piano, reason why I didn't have to go to a special snare drum to allow me to play quietly, why I didn't have to pick up a certain pair of sticks to allow me to play quietly, is I'd already been working on it. That's what Maestro was referring to. So wanted to make sure I get that point in there. And again, playing quietly for a couple of measures, one thing. Playing quietly for a couple of minutes, consistently, without any bumps, without any unintentional changes. That's a different kind of chops that we all need to be working on. So with that, back to the original video. So if you ever get a chance to play Ravel's Bolero, congratulations if you do. It's a lot of fun to play. Even though it's the same rhythm, taking that role, taking that position in the orchestra I found it to be very enjoyable. So keep some of these things in mind. Practice your excerpts, learn your excerpts, prepare and perform your excerpts, but just remember there's additional issues beyond that you might not get to when you play the actual piece with an orchestra. So thank you again for your time and attention. I'll wrap things up. Have a good day. Catch you next time.